This is
Positively
Hygiene with your host, Amber Lovatos,
Amy Prenti,
and Angela Doe.
Listen on as we dive into the positive of dental hygiene. So one of the questions we got is some asking for study tips in dental hygiene. I think y'all did really well academically. I was a good student, but I think I had a lot to learn when I was first starting, especially as a first gen. I know Angela was also first gen. But any study tips?
Well, my study habits changed. Like what I thought would work effectively for me when I went through my first bachelor's didn't work for me in dental hygiene school. It was like a completely different study skill set I had to do. For me, I had to write the things over and over and over again. And it wasn't even like I had to write it that I'm going to go back and read it, but I just had to write it to etch it in my brain. Almost like, okay, it's another Harry Potter reference. But when Harry Potter got punished and Umbridge had him write it on paper and it got etched in his arm, which that was really, really cruel. But it's sort of like that's how I etched it in my brain, was writing it over and over again. I never very rarely I went back and looked at it, but writing it helped me memorize it.
I think that's I would do something similar. During lecture, it goes pretty fast paced. So I would scribble everything. I would pre-print my PowerPoints because you were able to access them. I don't even know how it is now. People might use more electronic, but I would go to the library. I would print out the PowerPoints. I would go to class with it, and then I would write a bunch of notes all around it, very sloppy handwriting on purpose. And then I would come home and I would rewrite them with my colored pens and kind of organize it, highlight things, and then that night I would translate, or not necessarily that night, but before that next week's quiz, I would translate the highlighted portions, what I felt was important, into my Quizlet. And I would create a Quizlet for each class.
Oh, nice.
That was a question I was going to ask. Did you use paper flashcards or a Quizlet?
No, I started when did I use paper? I think it was during hygiene school, I learned what Quizlet was. So I was doing index cards. And then someone was like, why are you doing that? And then it became easier too, because I could.
Tell us what Quizlet is.
So Quizlet is it's an app that's all virtual flashcards. And what I love about it, I even have my daughter's 11. I have her doing Quizlet for her class.
Oh, because I'm there's probably a more updated version out now.
Yeah, there could be others out there. I know Quizlet has changed since I used it in hygiene school, because when I did it for her for studying for social studies, it was different, because I was like, oh, just star it. And she's like, Mom, there's no star. And what it used to be is you could star ones that you didn't know that you still needed work on. And then after you finished your flashcard set that you made, you could go back in and just study the ones that you starred. So then I would force myself to study, go through my flashcards. If I got 10 wrong, well, I'd go through the 10 wrong. Then I would go through 5 wrong. I'd go through, and I would continuously go on the ones I needed help with. Then I would start my full set over. And I would make sure before I went for that exam that I was able to get through all of my flashcards.
Did you do this in a study group? Because I don't know why I remember this, and I don't remember it vividly, so I'm not sure if it happened or not. But if you had a study group, did each of you take a different chapter and make a Quizlet and then share it with each other?
No, but that's a really good idea. We would get into study groups, but ours were never really effective. It was usually just a coffee break, and maybe we would talk about clinical things that were going on, or tips and tricks, but we never really, or just was a mental decompressing moment that I think was equally as effective as far as studying goes. But the only time, I'm just not a studying person in groups. I just don't do well with study groups, but I do know other people do. The one thing that I felt was good was when we got in a group, and I think it was when we were doing local, and we got in a group and we were explaining the physiology between the local anesthetic crossing the barrier and that ion change and how it becomes effective. And we took turns kind of going in front of each other and almost being an instructor explaining the process. And we did that for perio too. Things that were just a little bit more complex and talking about more physiology. I thought those moments were helpful. But as far as just quizzing each other, or I don't know, I need to physically be the one doing it in order to retain it.
What year did you graduate?
2018.
You?
15.
I graduated 13. And when I was in school, we still had people who had brought in voice recorders, separate little voice recorders. Yeah, to record our lecturer who was giving a lecture, they could re-listen to it. When I taught hygiene school, we actually now record the lectures on Panopto, and the students can listen back to the recording
Oh, that's nice.
at any time. Really, yeah.
You know, it's funny you say that because I was never one that I think that was what I needed until I do think my studying habits changed class to class. So, like things like oral anatomy. Okay, you know, the flashcards are great. It's very like here and there, you know, it's very factual information. Rogue memorization, that's when your flashcards are going to come in handy. But when you get into farm, you know, things like that, flashcards are handy. When you get into conceptual things like periodontology, how do you put that on a flashcard when you're talking about the entire, you know, so it's kind of a little bit tricky. And that was something I struggled with because all of a sudden I had this periodontist talking about all these things I couldn't even as a new student like wrap my brain around. Like I just learned the ligaments a couple months ago, and now you're talking about the flap surgery. I had no idea what the flap surgery was. Like I just couldn't comprehend what he was saying. And now I look, and of course it's second nature. But in the moment, I remember being so overwhelmed. I started recording the lectures, and I had a 45-minute commute. So what I would do, because what I would notice is when he would give us quizzes, so this is where I feel like the instructor is going to play a role in how you study. He would give out quizzes every week on last week's lecture, but it would never be anything that was, he told us from the get-go, he said, throw away the book. He's like, I don't like the book. He goes, I think they had to
I don't
do
like him.
I don't even know like what book. He's like, I'm never going to use the book. He's like, I'll tell you everything you need to know. And we're like, okay. And he did. He was really, really good. But none of his material that was on the quizzes, the weekly quizzes or the exams could be found in his PowerPoints. It was all what he said. So the first quiz, everyone was like, wait, I didn't see that. Like, I didn't find that. I didn't know, you know, everyone kind of panicked. So then that's when we started, or I started recording and I would listen to it. And I still remember, like, for an example, one of them was, you know, the first white blood cells to show up to a site of acute inflammation are neutrophils. And that was a question. And I remember that, and that because I think that was my aha moment. I was like, this guy's sneaky. Like, I need to find a way to like pass this class. And then I would start. And then on the drive, I would have just heard that. So when he's asking for specifics on a test, it didn't matter. Sometimes it would be numbers, you know, like what percent of the white blood cells are neutrophils? It'd be 70%. So it would be such specific information that he would ask. So if you have an instructor asking for specific things here and there, maybe at that point, auditory listening is going to work for that class, even if you're not typically an auditory learner. But when you take that exam and they're asking for a number percentage, that number, when you see it on paper, is going to stand out to you because you just heard it an hour ago, you know?
Yeah.
Well, you talked about having like a 40-minute commute. Mine was the same, about like 45, 50-minute commute. And I ended up having one of my classmates live nearby me, Tracy. She listens to her podcast. So we would carpool together, and that's what we did. I think they were integrating Panopto into her ear. So some lectures were Panopto. So we would like put that on in the car while we drove and listen to it. Or whoever was not driving would do flashcards and then quiz the person who's driving. So you can really like utilize that time for the commute. And that was like the only, I guess, interactive studying I had. I don't really do study groups either. I like to study with people, but like my own independent thing, but have people surrounding me, you know, but I think, you know, bouncing stuff off each other sometimes, maybe, because you talked about how like some of you would like be like an instructor and someone else would explain it and you would listen. It's nice to have things said in a different way. Sometimes that can trigger a different part you're remembering as well.
Yeah. To your point about like not knowing what flaps look like, so one of the things that I did do was when I would read something and I didn't know what it was, instead of skipping over it, I would research it. I would look it up and be like, what is this? And try to understand that like one little concept. And sure, that would take me time, but in the long run, it would really help me connect the dots. And then also to your point about like, you don't know if they have printout PowerPoints anymore. When I was teaching, students now have iPads and they can download the presentations onto their iPads, and they use like GoodNotes to write with their Apple Pen on their iPad. and I think that on GoodNotes, I think it converts it to
like text.
To text.
Like type.
So it's even easier because then you can copy it from your notes, paste it on the Quizlet.
My distraction
and make
is that I would want to
flashcards.
make everything look pretty. And I would spend all this time trying to look pretty and not actually studying.
It's the good old, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's because when I grew up, but it's the good old paper to pen that does it for my memory. Like even simple as writing in my planner. Like I tried digital planners for a while, but just writing that stuff down, like I would never remember it or it'd get lost in the calendar. But if I write it with pen or pencil, whatever, if I write it on paper, it just helps stick for me.
Me too. I still have a paper planner. I think another small tip that I had is I would figure out how much time I needed to study for each class. So things like intro to dental hygiene, maybe I only need to study like a day and a half for that test. But things like oral histology or dental anatomy, I need at least 3 days to study for those classes. So I would take out my calendar for the semester and I would map out all my tests, all my assignments, and then I would also then in a different color write in how many days I needed to study for each of those tests so that I already had that planned out. I know some people in my class every single day would be like, okay, today we had these 4 classes. Today I'm going to study for those 4 classes. That didn't quite work for me. I had to study for like one thing at a time. And so I would divide up like my days. So even if let's say I had to study 3 days for a test and I didn't have 3 days straight to study for that test, I would maybe study like one day on Monday, and then the next day I had to study for histo, right? And then I would study on Tuesday. But for sure, the day before the exam, I would 100% concentrate on that one topic. But I know different things work for different people.
I think I would always study. I had a routine of studying in order. I think I always just studied the night before an exam or the night before a test. We had weekly quiz. Is that what your program was too? It was a weekly quiz for every class, and then
It sure felt like it. If it wasn't like a standard thing.
It varied.
It varied.
It varied.
We got quizzed on every lecture a week later, and that kind of as a quiz, and then our exams on top of that. But then, so I would always, so you didn't really have time to study. I guess with our program, you didn't have time to study for another class because you had a quiz every week. So you kind of had for every class. You know what I mean? So you kind of, if you had your...
If you followed the quiz schedule, that would basically be your study schedule.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
So
wasn't ours.
So in an earlier episode, we had, Amy, you talked about getting your study space ready and having something like you liked and getting it organized because in dental hygiene school, your time is very little for your own. And so where did you guys study?
We studied a lot where our school was 5 minutes away from one of my good friend in school's houses. So I was 45 minutes away. She was 5 minutes away. So a lot of times we would either go to the library on campus or we would go to her house. And that's when we would do like the more breakdown studying, one person plays a construct, like someone who gets the concept, they're going to lead this. Like I'm great with gross anatomy. Like I did great in like oral anatomy and like farm things that I could just retain information, but conceptual stuff, I just really wasn't my thing, but my friend Lindsay, it was. So she would take on those, I can come up with little knickknacks of, oh, I remember this on this tooth because of this, like this rhymes with this, or this acronym stands for this, like I do great with like those silly things that I think help with like rogue memorization. But she would really take over and lead us on the things that were a little bit more diving into concepts. So we would meet at her house, and then a lot of the studying that I would do on my own, honestly, was like in my bed. Because Ricky would be sleeping and I would just be scrolling through my phone on my Quizlet, and it worked.
Yeah, I was a good student, but I was not good in study groups at all, like zero. So I hardly did any study group sessions at all. So I was my first semester in hygiene school, my first year, we were at an old building called like the dental branch, and they had private rooms, and that was my favorite thing. They were like up in an attic. It was really, really weird because it was like very narrow stairs to get up there. But it was so private. It was perfect. After that, that was when I moved out of my parents' house for my second year of hygiene school, because I needed some peace and quiet and I needed to be alone. And so really I studied on my own in my apartment when nobody was home. That was my best studying. I need absolute silence.
So sort of a side thing. So at the dental branch, wasn't the clinics in the basement?
Clinics were in the
So
basement.
clinics were in the basement and the study was in the attic. So in
Yes.
between was for like dental
Yes.
students then.
But what was nice was that also we were in a medical center, so you could go to the medical school library and study at the medical school
that's true.
library. Yeah, so I personally just need very, very quiet spaces, or I get distracted and I want to start talking and mingling. There were some instances where maybe like we did like a group of people were studying at the same time, but none of us were studying together.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
how
we
I
were
worked.
all together and then it was nice to have people around to be like, hey, I'm having a hard time with this like one particular concept, or maybe there's like notes that I was missing. I could go to you for that. And it's nice to have everybody there in that one room. Also helps keep you awake if it's late at night. But otherwise, yeah, very, very independent studier.
Yeah, we had, so even though we went to the same school, I was in the new building and they had study rooms, but really they had like individual study spaces, but it's all open. And so we would stay there till maybe about either 6 o'clock, either that's what the time they closed, or 6 o'clock because we didn't want to walk in the dark because where our school wasn't like in the safest of areas. And so, and then you had to walk to the parking lot. It wasn't like right there connected to the school. So we would stay there and study till it was time. And then I would go home and study a little bit more. And I'm glad, like my carpool buddy, Tracy, that we had the same mindset in how much we wanted to study. So we were able to like really understand each other and really be okay with like, yeah, let's stay after, let's do this, let's get it done.
Did you already have kids in hygiene school?
Yes, Natalie. She was about it was 5 and I graduated 2. When I started the program, I think she was 2. Yeah,
Wow.
she just turned 5.
Yeah, because I already had kids. My Christian was 4 and I think Andy was 5.
Which makes it harder.
Also harder to do this group studying stuff, for me at least.
I lucked out being so far. I think I was unique because I lucked out being so far from school because I was already up there and I had to stay up there. Like I was trapped on campus because I wouldn't have had enough time to come home and get back for my next class, So I kind of had time in between. Or like our clinic would start at 7 o'clock. Our classes got out at 5, but I was already up in the same town because we would go to UConn, but we were already at like UConn Medical Center, which was in Farmington. Our school was in Farmington. So we were already up there. I'm not going to drive 45 minutes home for 15 minutes to come back 45 minutes later, So I would get like 2 hours free time basically.
So it's interesting because our school schedule, I think you talked about this before, like ours was 8 to 5, literally all day. There was no real hard breaks during the day except for our lunch break. That was it. And the only other times that you had like an off time was when we were on rotations, and maybe our rotation schedules would vary. So you had scheduled like clinic off days. But otherwise, 8 to 5, there was no like, we didn't have any night clinic. I know there's some hygiene schools that have like night clinics.
We get out at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, we didn't have night clinics or weekend clinics. I worked at a program that had weekend clinics. We didn't have weekend clinics either. So harder for patients, honestly. Harder for patients to like go to appointments because
That's
there
true.
was no like after hours weekend
Yeah,
stuff.
because then they don't want to skip work either,
Yeah.
But Amber, you're right. You guys had kids during hygiene school. That's all I had to focus on because I lived at home during that time and I had like the support of my parents. Like I didn't have to cook. I didn't have to prepare anything. I guess I was like, that's all I had to focus on. So how did you guys like work on balancing dental hygiene school, studying, going to clinic, and having kids at the same time for family?
I had a lot of help from my parents. So a lot of times, sometimes if it was like really hectic week, I'd be like, hey, can y'all keep my kids for the week? And I'll pick them up on the weekend. And that's how like it would go. Like it was hard and sad to like be away from your kids for 5 days straight, but I had to do like what I had to do to get through hygiene school. But the first semester, I was living at home with my parents with my 2 kids. And for like background, we have a 3-bedroom home. My parents did it. It was a very small home, 3-bedroom, and it was me and my 4 sisters, plus my parents. So it's 4 of us, plus my parents, plus my 2 kids, plus my cousin and my aunt. We all lived, 10 of us, in a 3-bedroom home. And not like a big one. We had 1 bath and a half, and it was hard because I shared a room. In our room, it was me. There's 2 beds we had the main bedroom. It was 2 beds, me and my older sister, and then the 2 kids and another bed. So all of us in one room, and then me trying to find a quiet space to study. That was hard. So I ended up taking out student loans and paying for an apartment because I couldn't. And then the commute was so long. And there's like just so much Houston traffic. The commute maybe was like an hour, but there gets to be traffic and then it becomes 2 hours.
And that's just one way.
And you don't see your kids at all. And there's like just so much guilt. I still have a lot of guilt from sometimes feeling like I wasn't the best mother during that time, honestly. Yeah, definitely was not I felt like a good present mother during that time.
But you were, because you were looking out for their future, and it's a short time commitment. I know hygiene school can feel long while you're in it, but it's 2 years to have the rest of your life to achieve something better for your family. And that's amazing.
Honestly, I couldn't do it without my parents. It was because of them, right? Like them helping me raise my children is the reason that I was able to get through hygiene school. I didn't have a husband. I had my boyfriend, right? My husband, who's my husband now. But we'd only been dating a year at that point. He wasn't like anywhere ready to be like committed to being their father, although he did end up like we did when I got my apartment, he was also going to school. So he moved in with me and then he helped pay for our second year of the apartment. So I finished so that he could finish his prereqs to go to dental school and so that I could finish dental hygiene school. And then after I graduated hygiene school, I moved back home with my parents. I did. Yeah. Just have to do what you have to do to like work for you. For me, I needed quiet space. And so for quiet space, that meant having to move out of my parents' home because there wasn't space in my parents' home. I appreciated like everything they did for me, but that's what I needed in order to be like successful in this program.
Did you ever listen to music while you studied?
I can listen to Harry Potter while I
really?
work. I think because I've seen Harry Potter so much that I don't feel like I'm missing out on something. Same things with Gilmore Girls. I can watch Gilmore Girls. Yeah, like I'm working on my laptop and I have Harry Potter playing and that helps me work.
I can do that while working, but while studying, if I need to like mentally focus on something or like writing an email or something, okay, I can't listen to English music. I have to listen to K-pop music. Because the English music, because that English is registering in my brain while I'm trying to focus, it throws me off. But I listen to K-pop music because I did take like a semester of Korean, but I don't like understand, and that's, I can't understand them singing the song, right? But I like the music, I like the melody, been a K-pop fan for a long time. During that time is when I listen to K-pop music because at least I have like the musicality in the background and the nice soothing voices. But since I don't know what they're saying, my brain isn't like geared to focus in on it.
Yeah, that's how I feel with Harry Potter. I think because I've seen it so much.
Yeah.
My husband's like, you don't even watch it. Right now I'm editing a book and that like, it puts me in the working mood. Anything else I can't listen to. Music I can listen to sometimes.
For me, it has to be pitch quiet. If I'm actively studying, when I was doing like typing up my flashcards and I'm just looking at my notes and like typing, I would put on like a Discovery ID, like crime documentaries, because I could listen to a story as I'm visually engaged with something, and every now and then I'd look up because I'd be like, this guy, like blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, huh? Like watch out for that guy, like studying. But a candle, I have to have a candle lit.
Oh,
that was my thing. I don't know how it kept me engaged. I don't know. It would just
setting the mood for studying.
You do have to set the mood for studying. Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Yeah. My mom would always light candles growing up whenever she was cleaning. So maybe that was kind of like her focus, like thing. Like that was her focus trick. So maybe that was
I also need like a clean house.
Trick. I like.
Oh my gosh, which is hard because I am not a clean person.
Because then you can make excuses like, oh, I need to do that and not study. Like that's more important than studying. So let me go and tidy that up.
Okay, side question not related to this. Amy, do you clean before we come or is your house always this clean?
I think I'm just a minimalist, so it's hard to get messy. I don't think, I can promise you I don't clean. But
wow, that's nice.
I want to be a minimalist.
Me too. Teach us your ways. Well, I think that's kind of what we have for study tips.
Yes. So finding what you're, and I do say, if you're someone that's struggling with, am I visual? Am I this? Am I that? Think back to, we all took anatomy and physiology to apply to the program. Think back to what helped you in A and P, because if you were someone that, like, I know I can do great with bones, muscles, like muscle origin, insertion. Like I can do great with that. where I struggle more is like the releasing the sodium ions in order to, exacerbate the muscle contraction. And, that's the stuff that I so I know I don't do great with physiology. So if you know you are better at anatomy, then you're going to do better with flashcards and oral anatomy, pharmacology. You're going to do great with those. If you know you were better at physiology, then you probably are more likely as someone that would study better in groups,
Well, Amy, it's like you mentioned, depending on the subject, you can have a different study style too.
So I compare that to English and math. So I'm very much a math person. So I was very good at like oral anatomy or dental anatomy and pharmacology because I'm good at understanding concepts. And my sister's really good at English, so she's better at memorizing like data. So she was better at like things like bio. So know that like you might have your different strengths, and like that's okay too.
And I would say if you have anything, as corny as it is, share it, because I know there was, oh shoot, if I ever think of it, we'll have to put it on our stories. There was something I memorized, an acronym I made for local anesthesia, and it was like the length of efficacy for all the different, like the 5 top ones. And I forget, it was something about a dog barking, or like the puppy barks loudly or something, and like lidocaine, and it was.
We don't do local here in Texas yet.
Okay, well, I like to think people other than Texas listen.
I know, but you're looking at us like we have the answer. Like, I don't know what you mean. Yes, I've heard of lidocaine.
But it was
that's all I know.
But I do think if you think of something, then share it. Because I think I know I shared that on my personal page. And I had dentists and hygienists reaching out to me being like, man, I wish I had this in school. And I thought it was the silliest thing. And I was just like, oh. But I do think if you have, don't be afraid to be humble and to admit what you don't know. Like don't be, I think that's huge. Because I know I can just say, and I'm a great scaler. Now I'm so clinically confident that you could put anything in front of me and I'm not going to back away. Like I'm very confident now, but I wasn't. When I was a new student, I really wasn't. And so clinical intimidated me so much. And I remember having the ODU 1112 Explorer, and I would just look at the instrument and I was like, I can't tell you which side to adapt. Like I had no idea. And we were in a study group, but I felt okay saying that out loud. Like I know everyone knew me as like the straight A, like, oh, like Amy aces all the exams, like Amy does this. And I had no problem saying, I have no idea what I'm looking at. Like, I don't for some reason, it just wouldn't click. And then I remember one of my friends taking the instrument and being like, oh, well, you can just look at it and see how it just makes sense to go against the tooth. And I was like, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, I don't understand. They're like, well, see how it bows out on this side. And I was just like, no, like, I don't, they look identical to me, both sides. And I like couldn't grasp that idea. But my friends really sat there with me in the library. And like, I remember my friend Lindsay, she took it and she was holding it up against my finger and said, see how this feels. Okay, now look at this. See how the curve goes this way. And she had to, what you said before, Amber, tie in the concept for me. She's like, well, if you think about it, what are you using the instrument for? And of course, rogue memorization. So I know, detecting calculus. And then she goes, okay, so how are you going to detect calculus if it's bowing out away from the tooth surface? And I was like, and then so then she's like, okay, so now take it. And then she would like sit there with me, and then like I had it up, and then it made sense. And from that moment, I was able to apply it going forward. But I do think showing those vulnerabilities, because no one's really competing against you, or you shouldn't be competing academically or clinically against each other in hygiene school. You should be able to admit.
Yeah, that's hard.
Well, I know it is hard, but
that's
then
hard.
the more
my program was super competitive.
Yeah.
People were out. Nobody was out to help each other. Everybody was, I did really good in farm, and people would go around like asking me like, "What'd you make on that test?" Because our teacher, like, he put out the grades for everybody, for the class, out to everybody, but no names. So you just knew that like somebody got really high.
Yeah.
And I would score pretty high, and because they knew that like. I think we had mentioned that like the first test I did really well or whatever. They were going around they would ask me like, so what'd you get on this test? Because they were trying to figure out who's going to get like the award, like the top GPA award, which I didn't get. Shout out Peter Pham. I think he maybe got it. Who's now a dentist.
Yeah.
But, I love him. Yeah. They were like wanting to know. And I was like, dang man, like Like, what do you like? Who cares? Like, honestly, who cares? I'm just trying to get through this program, you know? But yeah, they were like really like, oh, what? And some of them had study tests from previous years, like old exams. And so that's how a bunch of them like got good grades because they be cheating.
And no one ever found out. See, we had someone in our program get kicked out for cheating, or 2 people got expelled for cheating.
Wow.
One of them I didn't agree with because it's just the fact that they didn't turn the person in.
Oh.
But that was part of our to get into the program or interview.
We had
you
that question too.
Yeah, did you? Yeah, what would you do if you saw? You know, of course, like everyone said, you know, you're gonna tell on them in so many words, and then
I'm a mind my business kind of person. That's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, but and I felt so bad because one student had claimed an attention disability, so she would go to take all of the exams in a separate room, but it was always like assumed that she used her phone because she wasn't a strong student, but she would pass these exams. No one sat in there with her. Then it came time for the final exam, and it was actually ironically in ethics. And they told her, you know, since this is the final exam, you're going to have a professor in the room with you the entire time. And she goes, you know what? I think for this one, I'll be okay to take it in the classroom. So during the exam, she was turning around and looking at the person's exam behind her. And the student that was behind her saw it and just didn't say anything, just tried to ignore it. Another student behind them actually took out their cell phone and recorded the whole thing. And I guess at some point, the student who had the paper, not the cheater, the other one, had tilted it to make it easier for the cheater student to look, just trying to be a good person, not trying to do, just, you know, it was a very, very, very good person. This person, excellent clinician. They are now a hygienist. They went to a different school. I would stand 110% behind this person as a clinician. They were a very, very good person, but got reported, video proof, couldn't deny it. So both students, not the one with the cell phone, both students ended up getting expelled for the program, not allowed to come back.
Yeah. So I thought about not cheating, but helping somebody cheat. I've never told this story. But in my program, there was an older woman. She was probably like, I was like 24 when I was in the program. She was probably like 50 something. She could have been like my mom. And I felt like she was my mom. And she was like just super sweet. And she was like struggling to get through the program. And she didn't make it. It's so sad that she didn't make it because she was so sweet. And I like wanted, in my mind, I was like, I could help her. Like I do good. And don't not at me. I could help her. And then rational me was like, no, Amber, you've got 2 kids. Like you can't like risk your like career, you know, to help somebody cheat. And also like now as an experienced dental hygienist, as an educator, I think like the injustice to the patient, right? Like helping somebody cheat. And then they go out and here's the deal. Either they get through the entire program and they can't pass their boards. That's a disservice to that person because they can't pass their board. Now they've wasted all this time and money, right? Or they graduate, maybe barely graduate and barely pass their boards, yet they're out here serving people and they have no business serving people, right? But I mean, who's to say? Because if you pass your boards, the state board is saying that you do qualify to be practiced and be caring for people. But there is that responsibility that the safety to our patients, our community, that is also a responsibility. And definitely not something that I thought of when I was in hygiene school, right? I thought about like, oh, my friend, this poor, sweet woman, like I just wanted to help her be successful. And I like tried to help her study. I could only do so much though.
Yeah, that's a great point that we're not just studying to pass these classes to make the grades, but we're studying to be better clinicians and to help our patients or future patients. So we are here to support you. If there's anything you need, maybe you need to vent a little bit, maybe you have a question about something, our DMs are open to you. You've got this, you can do it, and we will see you next Tuesday.
Thank you for listening to Positively Hygiene.
Join us every Tuesday for a new episode.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram for the opportunity for how you can contribute to our podcast.
And follow and review Positively Hygiene on Apple and Spotify podcast.